Belgrave Square, London, one evening in 1907. An elegant couple steps out of a limousine and rushes inside the magnificent Downshire house. A gust of wind sends a shiver through the lady. An icy wind blows over the inland seas, the vast snowfields of Greenland. The sea is iced over, white, everything is white. The red-faced butler announces Mr. and Mrs. Bruce Ismay. Ismay, manager of the White Star Line, one of the great passenger lines, has just arrived at the home of Lord Peary, the manager of the Harland and Wolff shipyards, where all the White Star ships have been built. At the very same moment, in Jakobshavn, Greenland, the Iceberg Factory, where 4/5 of the annual 30,000 icebergs form, the weight of the snow bears down on the ice. The imprisoned air escapes. The whiteness disappears in favor of the metallic blue tint of packed ice. A servant enters with a dish of caviar on crushed ice. Dinner is served. Ismay and Peary talk of the swift Cunard Line ships and the great German liners. How to beat the competition. The fire crackles away in the chimney. Suddenly, an idea. Ismay and Peary raise their glasses and toast one another. An enormous block breaks loose from the imposing cliff of ice that hangs over the Arctic Sea, slipping into the dark waters. An iceberg is born. As of that second, everything is determined. At the very moment the mere idea of the ship takes form, the mountain of ice that will destroy it starts a 5-year-long trek towards their meeting place. The fate of so many men and women is sealed as of now. Sipping his coffee, puffing on his cigar, Ismay sketches ever so simply the plans for a gigantic transatlantic liner, half again as big as all the others. The route between Europe and North America is so highly strategic that the companies wage war against one another to ravish the prize for the fastest crossing, the blue ribbon. Ismay's idea, not to try and build the fastest ship, but the most luxurious, with roomy cabins, a true floating palace, on time, reliable, safe, pure novelty. The iceberg moves through the sea, a majestic and gigantic mountain of fresh water floating on the salt water. And this one isn't even very big. Some are almost 400 yards, 360 meters long, over 300 feet, 100 meters high, and weigh up to 4 million tons. Peary and Ismay decide to build 3 of these giant liners. With such a trio of luxurious ships catering to a weekly crossing, they will be the masters of the North Atlantic. The iceberg has melted. Its shape has changed. It is half submerged. Only a few hundred icebergs have survived the 1,800 nautical miles to the shores of Newfoundland. 3 years have already passed, and the long trip south still remains. Ismay scrawls the names of the ships beside his sketches: Olympic, Gigantic, and the biggest of the 3, Titanic. The iceberg glides through the waters. 9/10 of it are now submerged. Only the tip pokes through the surface, and a rather unimpressive tip at that. But this is destiny in motion. Inevitable doom moving ever closer, foot by foot, in the whimsical marine tides, in the solitude, while, as they busy themselves with the construction of their machines, men play at being the masters of their lives. 5 years later.
Hot off the presses! The Monday, April 15th, 1912 issue has just come out. Clear skies this morning, but the weather will soon cloud over. A breeze from the south will bring us temperatures between 40 and 64 degrees this afternoon. Gentlemen, tonight you must turn your electricity on at 6:56 p.m.
Baseball special! St. Louis blasts Chicago 4-1. Cincinnati wins over Pittsburgh 11-7. Come on, buy a paper to read how the good old boys from New York City are gonna cream Washington today.
New York is really waking up from a splendid Sunday. Last night was the season's final show at the Metropolitan Opera, and the great Caruso himself sang Il Pagliacci, pure wonder. Wall Street is wonderful too, by the way. Last week's stock exchange results were this year's best, with 4,815,000 shares traded. And this week is starting off well, with 889,000 shares on the market, 177,000 of which just for the Steel Trust. Really, nobody can stop the country's increasing wealth.
You glorify the Steel Trust, but they force the workers to toil on Sundays, and they turn them into indentured slaves. The wealth you talk about is only shared between a handful of Central Park families. This can't go on. Actually, while the upper crust gossip mongers kill their boredom by exchanging the latest rumors about Miss Anna Held, the famous music hall actress, who this Sunday asked to be divorced from her husband and agent, Mr. Florence Ziegfeld, it's the very symbol of your inconsiderate faith in progress through cold science that's going belly up. Everybody knows the so-called unsinkable liner Titanic has sent a distress call after striking an iceberg. Your dream's sinking like a rock. It might even be at the bottom of the ocean, since nobody can even contact the Titanic's radios anymore.
Banana oil. The White Star Line has just quelled those rumors. The atmospheric interference has scrambled the radio messages. It is not because we're out of touch that we must be alarmed. No news, good news. And Cape Race confirms this. All the passengers are safe and sound. The Titanic is being towed to Halifax. The White Star has chartered an express train to Halifax for the passengers' families. Too bad the arrival is no longer in New York. All the best people had set up parties and dinners in honor of the return of our friends from their European rest. Now everything is canceled. What a bore. Well, let's just make the best of it. After all, they will surely have a story to tell.
If they make it back. The New York Times says there's loss of life.
How you carry on. Your newspaper is the only one to be printing that. They're looking for cheap publicity, that's all. The Titanic is damaged, but it cannot sink. Besides, icebergs no longer sink ships nowadays. Take the Niagara. It's docked in New York with 2 holes in the hull, yet it did not sink because of that. So the Titanic, just imagine. The greatest naval architects and the best builders were at its cradle.
The Titanic, the greatest of the 3 sisters born in Belfast, Ireland, in the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Everything in its conception is truly Titanic. 15,000 workers labor in the yard. First of all, to build cradles to fit the Leviathans. They each take up 2 berths, some 919 by 263 feet, with a height of over 230 feet. On March 31st, 1909, the Titanic's keel is laid, and the rest follows like an outsized wooden marble. 49-foot-high engines, beside which men resemble ants. A 15.5-ton anchor that must be drawn by 20 horses. A scaffolding like those used for skyscrapers, around which cranes work as though reaching up into the clouds. But even all the madness of the conception is nothing compared to the splendor of the ship's fittings, unbelievably luxurious. For the 700 first-class passengers, the Titanic offers luxury that has never before even been imagined. A gymnasium with electric camel and elephant, Turkish bath, swimming pool, racquetball court. The vessel's masterpiece is the candelabra, with its 21 branches that soars over the monumental staircase, floating above a splendid bronze angel. Stunning accommodations, like the suites, made up of 2 sides, each boasting its own bedroom, wardrobe room, bathroom, water closet, living room, and individual entrance. All this linked by a shared sitting room and a glassed-in veranda looking out over the sea, complete with electric heating and wood fire chimney, and of course, private kitchen and servants' quarters. The rooms all have different interiors. Louis XVI, Louis XV, Empire, and the range of furniture is just as great. 50 different types of tables, 30 kinds of chairs. The interior decoration is perfected to the most minute detail. Just like the glassed-in promenades, the restaurant dining rooms with their silverware and fine china, the lounges, everything is pure luxury and sumptuous splendor. The trip will, however, cost no less than £800. In comparison, The workers from Harland and Wolff earn around 3 or 4 pounds for a 6-day week, and that's good pay. Furthermore, first class actually shows a deficit, but it brings prestige and advertising. Second class is a revolution in itself. It was created a mere 10 years ago, and on the Titanic, it's been developed like never before. Not as lavish as first class, but a lot less expensive. Second class offers comfortable and beautiful rooms. The 700 second class passengers are treated to sober yet high quality furniture in rooms decorated in various styles. This is the category the White Star Line counts on to see the following years pay off, as the early part of the century gives birth to a social class made up of merchants and self-employed men who, more and more well off, now wish to profit from their leisure time and yearn for a certain luxury. The least spectacular revolution, yet the most important one, takes place in third class. For the first time, the Titanic brings these passengers bedrooms. And even though they are shared by several people, what an evolution compared to the steerage dormitories and their rows of cots. Furthermore, while the ticket is slightly more expensive than with the other lines, 12 pounds per crossing, or 66 times cheaper than first class, the Titanic feeds the travelers 3 meals a day, and in restaurants, if you please. Until then, third-class passengers were supposed to bring along their own food for the entire crossing. For the first time, a ship allows third-class passengers to travel in clean and decent conditions for a fair price. The 1,000 third-class passengers even have their own lounges, smoking rooms, and promenade decks. The 900 crew members are divided between a privileged class and poor devils. While the handful of officers enjoy great comfort, or even luxury, like Captain Smith in his grandiose cabin, the bulk of the sailors and cabin boys, true proletarians of the sea, are packed away in conditions a lot less amenable than the third-class passengers. Maids, waiters, cooks, sailors, mechanics, electricians, gym teachers, errand boys. It's a true miniature city that thrives inside the biggest ship in the world. Endless days of work, bad wages, atrocious working conditions. The worst off are the stokers. Throughout the entire crossing, they never see the light of day, and a special corridor has even been set up for fear the passengers might catch a glimpse of their soot-covered faces. Every hour of the day, they must feed the cavernous boilers, shoveling in the 7,000 tons of coal required for each crossing, and that must be broken up by hand. In the hellish heat and never-ending racket, in the deepest reaches of the ship, below the waterline. That is the price paid to enable the important people to sip their brandy 7 stories above the waves, behind their vast bay windows. The Cunard Line steamer Carpathia has rescued the Titanic survivors. The anxious crowd rushes to 24 State Street, to the Cunard offices. Everybody wants to know whether their family members or friends have been saved. The telephone, Broad 3300, rings off the hook. The first lists are drawn up, incomplete, full of misspellings and mistakes. Orphaned relatives are given false hopes, whereas others, crushed with pain, will later learn of the miracle. The number of survivors climbs from 675 to 855, goes back down, then up again. People's nerves shatter. Mr. Sumner, the Cunard manager, desperately tries to get in touch with the Carpathia. Unfortunately, his radio is not powerful enough. Worrying over the fate of his friend Archie Butt, U.S. President William Howard Taft sends 2 Navy ships out, the Chester and the Salem, to establish a radio link and look for any additional survivors. At Lloyd's, as in all the other insurance companies, a wind of panic rises. All the insurance companies of Europe and America cannot cover the loss. Nearly $17 million, or £3.5 million. More than twice the enormous cost of the Titanic itself. The claims filed range from extravagant sums, $12 million just for the diamonds, or the $600,000 a passenger wants for his wife's pearl necklace, to smaller things, William Carter's Renault, $5,000. Or a photo signed by Garibaldi, $3,000. To outright strange items: Eugene Daly's bagpipes, $50. Stuart Collett's college classes, $50. Wilson's Arab costume, $5. Or Edwina Trout's marmalade machine. There are so many flags at half-mast along Wall Street that one cannot make out the other end of the street. After all, over a dozen of the country's financial lords are lost in the wreckage, and they alone are worth some $200 million. As of 8 a.m., the White Star Line offices at 9 Broadway are swarmed, and by 10 o'clock, mounted police must move in to hold the crowd back. People will remain until the evening. As soon as the crowd spots the face of a White Star employee, the yelling starts. "Liars! Why did you hold everything back?" Inside, the people are jam-packed, lining up. Families and friends wait to question the employees. The din of questions, rumors, fears is drowned out by joyful yells and screams of despair. The telephone, Rector 2100, is constantly busy. In the room, the New York manager, Philip Franklin, is prey to an optimism bordering on madness or cruelty. He dares state that if the Carpathia has only found 1/3 of the passengers, it's because the others are on board the Parisian or the Virginian.
Did they confirm over the radio?
Luckily, no. And because we haven't contacted them, there's still hope. I'm sure they must have found people clinging to the ship's wreckage.
But the water's ice cold. There are icebergs.
That's it. The passengers who missed the lifeboats must have thought of climbing onto the icebergs. They'll all be saved.
The saddest part is that to avoid the truth, to dare retain hope, people believe him. New York's most powerful private radio is located in John Wanamaker's department store. It's an advertising stunt, with the operators out in the open and wearing headphones to entice the curious onlookers. But it's young David Sarnoff who runs the station, and he manages to contact the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. Therefore, the most exact news is to be heard at Wanamaker's. The Titanic really did go down at 12:47 in the night of Sunday to Monday after striking an iceberg. The sole survivors are on board the Carpathia, who we do not yet know. One name is on everybody's lips: Captain E.J. Smith. Everybody knows he went down with his ship, like a good captain ought to. But people bring out an article from 1907, published in the days when he commanded the maiden voyage to New York of another White Star steamer, the Adriatic.
What can I say of my 40 years at sea? I can only answer, not the slightest incident. Oh, of course, I've had my share of storms and fog, but I've never even seen the slightest accident. I never saw a wreck, never have been wrecked, nor even ever threatened with a wreck. You see, I've nothing worth writing a story about.
If some frown at the irony in this quotation, another quote casts a chill throughout the city. Talking of the Olympic, Smith stated that
if this ship were to strike a submerged object or an iceberg, which would rupture several of the watertight compartments, we would only have enough lifeboats for 1/3 of the passengers. The Titanic is not better off.
Such a forecast from such a man. Was this then unavoidable? If the powerful folks of the city have canceled their excursions to the museums and the concerts, if the disappearance of so many wealthy industrial tycoons is paralyzing the country's economy, the news also rattles New York's poor districts. The poor and the immigrants gather in the movie theaters that the rich disdain. 300,000 tickets sold each day in New York alone. The silent movies attract all those who cannot speak English. The ticket costs a mere nickel. It's cheaper than going to the tavern. You can stay as long as you want. And in the dark room, the young men can flirt with the ladies. We're far from the chaperones of the small Sicilian or Polish villages. The news of the disaster races along in the score of languages spoken by New York's poor. Everybody knows a fellow countryman who is coming in on the Titanic. And all are hurt by this tragedy, which could have just as easily carried them away.
It's That's incredible what happened to that Titanic. Sunk by an iceberg and all. I remember a poem my mother loved, over 100 years old. It's by Celia Thaxter, and it's about an iceberg that gently breaks off and floats towards the south. A ship sails towards it, which the iceberg sinks, while gently continuing its route.
Yeah? Well, hold on. A short story just came out in Popular Magazine, The White Ghost of Disaster by Maine Blue Garnet. It's about a liner that's over 750 feet long and that sinks after hitting an iceberg. And half the passengers die because there's not enough lifeboats. They say the author dreamt of this story while traveling on the Olympic. Talk about a premonition.
What about Morgan Robertson's book? It's even more incredible. It dates back to 1898, yet everything in the book is just like what happened. Everything. The size, the displacement, the speed, the 3,000 beds on board, the 2,000 passengers on the maiden voyage, the lack of lifeboats, the iceberg ramming the starboard side.
Except the Titanic's for real.
And Robertson's ships, the Titan.
No!
The worst is the title of the novel, Futility.
Anyhow, your Robertson, well, he didn't experience it up close, because I remember a short story by William Thomas Steed, the head editor of the Review of Reviews, in which he tells the story of a liner, the Majestic, that is sunk by ice.
So what? It ain't new. Did he say the ship was the biggest, or was old Steed's story set on a maiden trip?
No, it's just a moving story, especially when you remember the Majestic belongs to the White Star Line, and that its captain was Smith, and also that William Steed just died on board the Titanic.
Wow!
Yes, he was coming to New York at the request of President Taft to speak at a conference about world peace.
Steed went down with the ship without changing his calm and quiet manners. He remained till the end in the first-class lounge, reading ever so quietly amidst the wild commotion. Steed, so interested by spiritualism, and whom the mediums had often warned of the dangers he would face were he to travel by water. For once, on Tuesday evening in New York, the social gap is done away with. Rich and poor, men and women, young and old, Americans for several generations or immigrants fresh off the boat, are all brought together by the tragedy. The parties and the debts are forgotten. Only hope remains, because everybody still hopes.
My husband is on board the Virginian. I'm sure of it.
The churches, temples, and synagogues are full of burning candles.
Lord, let my son be on the Parisian.
And the prayers rise into the night.
Let the Navy ships find my cousin.
As soon as the city awakes, all of New York knows there is no longer any hope of finding more survivors. The Virginian and the Parisian have established radio contact.
We arrived too late. No survivor on board. The only ones saved are the 700 on the Carpathia.
Maybe they'll still find some lucky ones clinging to a table or to some wreckage.
The radio kills any attempt at hope.
The temperature of the sea and air are very low. Anybody drifting in the water is sure to have already died from the cold.
As though the heavens themselves joined in the morning, the sun went into hiding at noon. A total eclipse. Everyone is bent on the only hope left. The person I love. My brother, sister, nephew. They must be on the Carpathia. It just can't be otherwise. The Navy cruisers transmit the first list of names from the Carpathia. Wanamaker's is no longer a department store, but a blend of mourning, Captain Smith killed my 2 sons, and joy, thank you, my God, for having spared my parents. David Sarnoff works the radio without a blink of sleep. He feels as though he's a messenger of death. With all hope gone, hatred and an urge for revenge appear. Aimed at whom? Who can be punished for the hundreds of dead? Captain Smith has disappeared. Where are the guilty parties? In Washington, D.C., the government is on the move. 5 bills concerning maritime safety are brought before Congress, and an official committee is set up to conduct an inquiry into the reasons behind the wreck of the Titanic. Senator Smith is in charge. How can an unsinkable ship be sunk by an iceberg on its very first trip? It's outrageous. In New York, the families and friends press together on the White Star office's steps. Everybody wants in. Everybody wants to know who is on the Carpathia. What is sure is that Archie Butt, Taft's friend and emissary, is not on the Carpathia. He remained with the painter Francis Millet and passengers Clarence Moore and Arthur Ryerson, whose wife and 3 children were saved, playing cards in the first-class smoking room until the very end. People learn that their relatives are gone for good.
How will we manage? We can't even bury them. You're even robbing us of a grave around which to gather.
A White Star employee steps forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, have no fear. The company is chartering a steamer to go and seek out the remains of your loved ones. And if we must spend weeks doing so, then we will.
The Mackay Bennett, helmed by Captain Lardner, leaves Halifax, the hold filled with crushed ice for the corpses. On board, besides the cargo load of pine caskets, are an undertaker and a priest. The ship steams out for its morbid mission: bring back some dignity for the victims' families. Plainclothesmen suddenly cut through the crowd packed outside the White Star Line office. The Justice Department inspectors enter to ask about the false statements that were issued Monday by the White Star Line, stating that the Titanic was supposedly out of danger. Philip Franklin, manager of the New York White Star office, is questioned.
Didn't you broadcast those radio messages on purpose, so you could have the time to take out more insurance to cover the cargo?
Of course not. We never...
So it was only to enable you to sell as many shares as you could before the stock crashed?
No, not at all. It was a tragic mistake, but an honest mistake. Between the serious messages and the hundreds of amateur radios, we got all mixed up. The airwaves were a real madhouse, and it was unthinkable that the Titanic...
Then how come your Montreal office claims you sent them a message on Monday from New York stating that the Titanic had gone down with everybody on board?
Actually, the White Star Line comes out clean from the inquiry, it being only guilty of mistakes and bad information.
My God, look at that poor woman. She lost her son and daughter-in-law. They were honeymooning. What a tragedy.
The worst part is that they'd still be alive if that Captain Lord had acted as a sailor.
Captain Lord?
Captain Stanley Lord is in charge of the freighter California. A little before 11 p.m. Sunday night, he asks his radio operator, Cyril Evans, to contact the Titanic.
Hello, we are put up for the night, surrounded by ice.
Evans is cut short.
Get out! Shut up! You're scrambling my signal. I'm communicating with Cape Race.
Evans complies. Then, a little later, he turns the radio off and goes to bed. It's 11:30 p.m. At the same second, on board the Titanic, the tragedy begins. 1 hour later, when Californian's officer Herbert Stone sees white flares, he believes the Titanic is shooting fireworks. After all, he's used to seeing red flares in case of danger. But a true professional, he wakes Captain Lord and uses a Morse beacon to send messages towards the outline of the ship he glimpses on the horizon. No answer. Officer Groves goes down to check on the radio. Everything's quiet in the headphones. Unfortunately, Operator Evans is asleep and can't tell him that you have to crank up the signal detector. Groves leaves. It's 15 minutes past midnight. At that very instant, ships that are further away, the La Provence, the Mount Temple, and the Ipiranga, pick up the Titanic's CQD. CQD, come quickly danger, the father of the SOS. White rockets instead of red ones. No answer to the Morse beacon. Silent radio headphones. The Californian did not catch on to the tragedy that was occurring just a few miles away. Who knows? Could they have saved everybody? Or did the Titanic go down too fast? Whatever the case, Captain Lord will pay dearly for this horrid series of circumstances. The White Star office resembles the Tower of Babel. The families that have come to find out what happened to their relatives hail from all over the world. Many Americans, English, Irish, and Scots, of course, as well as the French, Belgians, and Swiss, who are from countries close to where the Titanic took on passengers. But all of Europe is there. Turkey, Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Austria-Hungary, Denmark, and especially the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Norway, Sweden, which paid a high toll in lives. A few Russians and Croatians are present too, along with the many Bulgarians. The Americas were on the liner too, from north to south. Uruguayans, Peruvians, Mexicans, Cubans, Haitians, Canadians, and Asia too. Hong Kong, Japan, Thailand, along with the rest of the world. Australia, South Africa, Lebanon, and many Syrians. How come they traveled so far to board the Titanic in Southampton, Cherbourg, or Queenstown? Pure fate. The third-class passengers did not have tickets for the trip. At their local travel agencies, they bought a one-way pass to emigrate to the United States, and the agency was required to put them on the first ship leaving. Thus, after traveling by train and boat, they arrived the day the Titanic was leaving and climbed on board, thinking themselves lucky to enjoy the peak of comfort and modern technology. They could not imagine that they would never share that pleasure with their relatives. Many families of 4 or 5 people are thus cut down, sometimes even of 8 or 9 or 11. Like Mr. and Mrs. John Sage and their 9 children, ranging from 4 to 20. Leaving Peterborough in England, none will ever reach Jacksonville, Florida. In the large room of the White Star office, groups gather together. The families, waiting for the sentence of the sea, talk to one another, speaking of their loved one, telling how and why they were on board the Titanic. And there are the lucky ones. All those whose relatives canceled just before the ship sailed, or who got off at Cherbourg or Queenstown. Southampton, England, Wednesday, April 10th, 1912. The Titanic waits in the deep-water dock specially built by the White Star Line. 7 a.m. Captain Edward John Smith bids his wife Eleanor and his 12-year-old daughter Helen goodbye before climbing into the waiting taxicab. 8 a.m. The crew is accounted for. Some are missing. Replacements are hired amongst those waiting on the dock for their stroke of luck. Among the sailors, an imposter. The night before, he made the real sailor drink in order to steal his papers and to take his position on the ship. We will never know who he was. 9:30 a.m. On the dock, the second and third class train arrives from Waterloo Station, London. The second class passengers enter through C deck. Edwina Celia Trout, ticket 34-218. Benjamin and Esther Hart and their 7-year-old daughter Eva, ticket 13-529. Charles Aldworth, the chauffeur of William Carter's 25-horsepower Renault. Father Thomas Roussel Bilesoff, off to celebrate his brother's wedding. Mr. Hoffman and his 2 sons. Mr. Hoffman is actually traveling under an assumed name. He split up with his wife and is really Mr. Navratil. He is abducting his children. Only the 2 boys, 2 and 3 years old, will survive. It will take some time before they are reunited with their mother. The third-class passengers come in through the stern, many Scandinavians. The family of John Sage with the 9 children, who has just purchased a citrus farm in Florida. Prize fighters Leslie Williams and David Bowen, off to trade blows in the United States. The third-class passengers get lost in the maze of iron-walled corridors. The children break free from their parents' hands. People come, people go, people desperately trying to find their cabins among the 300 divided among D, E, F, and G decks. 11:30 a.m. The first-class train pulls to a stop. The journalists rush over to grab the celebrities. The officers and stewards wait on the gangway leading to the big entranceway on D deck. Here come Mr. and Mrs. Jacques Futrelle, the inventor of modern-day crime novels, Colonel Gracie and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Isidore Strauss and their servant, Ellen Bird. During the wreck, Ida Strauss will refuse to leave Isidore. We shall die as we have lived, together. Mr. Strauss is then asked to take place in a lifeboat with his wife. Seeing that he is not a young man, no one will object.
No, I desire no favors that the other passengers do not receive.
They settle themselves in their deck chairs and wait for the end to come, calm, together. Later in New York, Mr. Strauss's testament is read.
Ida, please, it is now time for you to think less of the others and a bit more about yourself. Enjoy life.
Some 50 passengers cancel their trip at the last moment. The Fricks, because Mrs. Frick sprained her ankle. The millionaire Vanderbilt, obeying his mother, who does not trust maiden journeys. The owner of the White Star Line, John Pierpont Morgan, held up for business. 3 p.m. The monumental liner reaches the sea and sets off on her inaugural trip towards New York via Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland. The carefree passengers are oblivious to the fact that down in the hold, a fire is blazing in coal bunker number 6, ever since Belfast. Scores of stokers are tossing the burning embers into the boiler and hosing down the flames. The fire is under check. It will not spread. And in fact, this is a fairly ordinary event. No risk for the ship. 6:30 p.m., Cherbourg. Having come by train from Paris, 274 passengers board the Titanic from the tenders Traffic and Nomadic. 100 Syrians, Croatians, and Armenians are alongside the rich Benjamin Guggenheim and Molly Brown. 24 passengers are lucky enough to disembark. 8 p.m., the Titanic leaves the Bay of Cherbourg. Crossing the channel at night, it reaches Ireland at 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, April 11, 1912, anchoring some 2 miles from the harbor. 113 third-class and 7 second-class passengers are ferried over on the tenders America and Ireland. 7 travelers go ashore. Among them is Francis Brown, seminarian and amateur photographer. One last man escapes the Titanic, hiding under the mailbags. John Coffey, 24 years old, a Queenstown boy who got himself hired in Southampton in order to get a free trip back home. 1:30 p.m. The port anchor goes up. The boilers let off steam. The propellers start to churn. When a black head pops out of the very top of the stern chimney, a soot-covered stoker is taking a breath of fresh air and a last look over green Ireland. The Titanic heads off into the Atlantic for New York. It didn't make it, and on Wednesday the 17th, in the White Star offices, they're still waiting for some news of their friends. Are they alive or dead? Suddenly, a rumor races through the room. The Carpathia is nearing the American coast. Every radio operator in the United States tries to contact the Cunard liner, and the airwaves are totally saturated. Specially equipped ships set to sea. On board are top-notch radio operators, journalists, photographers, and even some doctors specialized in mental disease, there to help the survivors who might have gone mad because of the tragedy. But a heavy fog rises, preventing the ships from spotting the Carpathia. Suddenly, a reporter from the Globe, Winfield Thomas, on board another Cunard Line steamer, the Franconia, gets the great news. The Carpathia is carrying 713 survivors, all of them perfectly sane. The ship will reach New York late tomorrow night. Everyone will learn the truth of the matter. The Carpathia is expected in New York around 9 p.m. 200 uniformed police and scores of plainclothesmen are on duty. Nearly the entire NYPD is out. They block off all the streets around the pier. Since last night, Nobody is allowed on Cunard Line's Pier 54, where the Carpathia is to dock. While every paper in America wants to cover this incredible event, reporters are drastically screened. Very few obtain passes, which leads the New York Times to rent an entire floor of a hotel adjacent to the pier, setting up 7 phones for its 16 newspapermen. The charitable societies are also out at work. The Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the YMCA, German, Irish, and Italian immigrant aid organizations. Volunteers prepare to bring comfort, and over 5,000 beds are set up for the survivors. Hospitals get ready too, and the mayor even sends 2 coroners and an undertaker. At the same time, donations are collected all over and pour in to help the third-class passengers. The entire city is in a state of shock. All of New York wishes to know who is alive, who is lost, and is Captain Smith really the one to blame? The river's estuary is choppy, with a strong east wind and a light fog. Over 50 little boats await the liner. There are tugs, ferries, yachts, all filled with newspapermen and onlookers. The mayor himself is there, with a party of officials. On Cunard Line's Pier 54, where the Carpathia is to dock, policemen set up ropes, dividing up the pier into alphabetical sections. Green lanterns dangle from the ropes, shining in the drizzle as night falls. The first spectators arrive around 6 p.m., very few at first. Then, around 7 p.m., there are 200, 600 at 8 p.m., and after that, things go wild. Between 8 and 9 p.m., 30,000 people crowd the pier. At the southernmost tip of Manhattan, in the rain, people crowd to see the Carpathia go by. There will be 10,000. Rumors race through the crowd. Captain Smith's career is devoid of the slightest accident. Besides, it is said that the incident involving the New York was not caused by Smith. On the contrary, thanks to his experience, he handled the Titanic so well he avoided a seemingly inevitable collision. It's Ismay, for sure, who forced Smith to go flat out to obtain the fastest crossing and win the coveted blue ribbon. It must also be Ismay who spread the false good news in order to prevent his company from going belly up. By the way, how come he's alive? If anybody should have sacrificed himself, he's the one. Captain Smith, he went down with the Titanic. In the White Star Line building, close to the pier, Philip Franklin, the White Star Line's vice president, receives telegrams from Bruce Ismay. The U.S. Navy radio operators intercept 3 messages.
Most desirable Titanic crew aboard Carpathia should be returned home earliest moment possible. Suggest you hold Cedric, sailing her daylight Friday unless you see reason contrary. Propose returning in her myself. Please send outfit of clothes, including shoes, for me to Cedric. Have nothing of my own. Please reply. Very important, you should hold Cedric daylight Friday for Titanic crew. Answer. Think most unwise to keep Titanic crew until Saturday. Strongly urge detaining Cedric, sailing her midnight if desirable.
The 3 notes are signed Yamsi, the coded signature Ismay uses for his personal and private messages. The Americans realize he's getting ready to skip to England. Senator William Alden Smith, the head of the U.S. Senate's inquiry, decides to leave Washington for New York City. But does he have the power to arrest British subjects? President Taft himself confirms his right to do so. After all, if the radio operator never answered the president's personal messages inquiring into whether his friend and aide-de-camp Archie Butt was alive or dead, it can only be because Ismay is censoring the Americans. Suddenly, at 8:30 p.m., a dark shape looms out of the fog. The shadow slowly swivels around, and the Carpathia's single stack is spotted. With the Statue of Liberty in the background, the mayor's tug whistles, and all the ships in the harbor join the concert, whistling and tolling their bells. Immediately, the crowd of over 40,000 yells out, and as though God were once again adding his personal touch, pouring rain starts to fall, and a storm erupts. The pitch-black night is shaken by thunderclaps and lightning. The ships surround the Carpathia. The photographer's ceaseless flashes mix with God's lightning, and even the bellowing thunder cannot drown out the questions blaring from the megaphones. The Carpathia slowly moves forward. She stops to take the pilot on board, and the reporters try to climb onto the ship. The Carpathia's officer Reese must yank the pilot aboard and even punch a newspaperman in the chin to make him climb back down. Another journalist chews on soap to start frothing like a madman, yelling that his sister is on board. Pushed back, he offers $100, $200. No use. The Carpathia finally slips away. Still, one reporter does manage to climb aboard. Captain Rostron spots him and has him swear to stay on the bridge and not go below decks to see the passengers. The man will remain true to his word. The Titanic's survivors appear at the railing. The photographers shoot like mad. The newspapermen call out to them. The Titanic's sailors are amongst them. Reporters offer them $50 to leap overboard and swim to the tugs. No deal. One ice water bath was enough. Suddenly, the Carpathia reaches the Canard Pier, and a deadly silence settles in, cutting off even the most rash of the newspapermen. But the liner steams by without letting up. Amazement. The Carpathia moves up to the White Star Line's pier and stops. Lightning bolts crisscross the night, illuminating the sailors who lower the Titanic's lifeboats, the sole remnants of the great liner. Then the Carpathia comes back in the continuing silence. The first sobs are heard as the ship's lines are cast. The gangplanks are lowered. It is 9:15 p.m. A cry wells up. Here they come! Survivors leave the ship. Many are not well dressed, wearing only such clothes as they were able to borrow on the Carpathia. But they are greeted with screams of joy and tears of happiness that come as a counterpoint to the lamentations of those learning the certainty of a relative's demise. Unfortunately, for each opportunity for joy, there are two opportunities for sorrow. The first-class passengers come first, even now. His subpoena in hand, Bruce Ismay leaves for the Ritz. Mrs. John Jacob Astor is greeted by Vincent Astor, a nurse, and two doctors. They leave by limousine for their Fifth Avenue mansion. As Major Arthur Peutchen leaves for the Waldorf Astoria, he realizes he's lost his wallet. Not to worry, they will surely let him pay later. Others leave the city, like Mrs. Charles Hayes in her own private train. It's not the same for the third-class passengers, who can only disembark around 11 p.m. The newspapermen do not care about them. They've lost all their belongings in the wreck. But the public and private welfare organizations are there. Those who have friends or family in the city may land without any paperwork. The others are screened by 7 immigration officers. They're the only legal immigrants to avoid Ellis Island. In the pandemonium, some women lie and head into New York alone, widowed, penniless, without any idea of where to go, without even speaking the language. Famished, emaciated, worn out, with both feet frostbitten. Harold Bride, the Titanic's second Marconi radio operator, is still sending Morse messages despite the Carpathia's safe arrival. The inventor of the wireless himself, Guglielmo Marconi, appears with Jim Spears of the New York Times. But Bride does not even look up. Rooted in front of his radio set, a small blue flame dancing under his fingers, he only has eyes for his duty.
No need sending that anymore, my boy,
says Marconi. Bride swivels around, recognizing the famed inventor.
Mr. Marconi, Phillips is dead. He's gone.
Pulling out his notepad, Jim Spears steps forward.
Can you tell us about that?
I woke up a bit before midnight to fill in for Phillips, my colleague. Seeing how exhausted he was, I immediately replaced him without changing out of my pajamas. That's when the captain came in. "We've hit an iceberg," he said. "I'm going to inspect the damage. Get ready to send a distress call if I tell you to." We hadn't felt the impact. It's funny that such a disaster didn't even shake the ship, and we were lucky. The radio had broken down, and we just spent all day repairing it, successfully. Otherwise, nobody would have come to save the lifeboats. Captain Smith returned 10 minutes later. Already we heard a heck of a hubbub outside. Send an international distress signal, he told us. And Phillips started sending a CQD. We laughed about it, not taking things very seriously. The captain was back 5 minutes later. What are you sending? As a joke, I said we could send an SOS. That's the news signal. It might be our last chance to use it. We all laughed. We connected with the Carpathia. She changed bearing to come to help us. I left to warn the captain. The decks were crowded with men and women. Total chaos. Distress flares were being sent. It was obvious that the Titanic was tilted forward. I saw that women and children were being made to climb into the lifeboats. Back in our cabin, Phillips pointed out that I was still in my pajamas. I got dressed. The captain came to tell me that water was rising in the engine rooms and that Dynamo feeding the radio would soon be submerged. Already our messages were getting weak. I went back out. The ship was listing very sharply, with the water very close to the deck. I saw a lifeboat being put to sea, number 14, I believe. There were about 60 people. I saw Mr. Brown bidding his wife and daughter, Edith, farewell. I asked him what time it was. His watch showed 1:30 a.m. Suddenly, some passengers jumped forward to leap into the boat. Officer Lowe fired 3 shots. That sure cooled them down. This made me go look for something that would float for Phillips and me. I came by the steel baron, Mr. Benjamin Guggenheim. He was leaving the deck with his butler, to whom he said, "Let us go get dressed. I would want my wife to know I died a gentleman." I pulled a jacket on, my boots, and a second jacket. Then I helped Phillips with his boots, coat and jacket. Phillips never stopped sending messages, not even for a second. The captain came in, carrying his megaphone. He told us that it was over. "You have done your duty. I'm setting you free. Now it's every man for himself." The captain left to announce the news on the sinking deck. The ship was at a terrible angle. It was 2:05 a.m. Despite the captain's order, Phillips keeps on sending messages. I step into the room to get his stuff, and as I step back out, I see a stoker pulling Phillips' life jacket off. Phillips was so engrossed in his work that he didn't even realize what was going on. I threw myself at the stoker and sure hope I killed the scoundrel. Phillips and I went out onto the bridge. The band was playing a ragtime tune. To my great surprise, a collapsible boat remained. People were trying to get it off the ship. There was no sailor among them, so I went to help when a wave struck the deck. By reflex, I grabbed hold of the lifeboat and was swept overboard with it. I found myself underwater, beneath the lifeboat, which was crushing me. I dove, managed to get free, and realized that the sea was covered with hundreds of people floating in their life jackets. The Titanic, she was beautiful. Smoke and sparks flew out of the stack, and the ship's bow was sinking like a duck. During all that time, the band kept playing. We heard Autumn. Then the ship went vertical and sank in one slow and gentle move, without even a ripple. I was shaking from the cold. I spied a lifeboat nearby and started swimming like mad. I was wiped out. I felt myself go under when a hand took hold of me, and I was pulled on board the collapsible boat with which I had been washed overboard. It was still upside down, and the sides were not well set up. We were perched on precarious safety, but salutary safety, since all around us it was sheer hell. People were drowning in the icy waters, unable to swim. Someone said we should pray, so on our waterlogged hull, Catholics, Methodists, Presbyterians, all together we said the Lord's Prayer. There was but one woman on board, Rosa Abbott, a third-class passenger, and the tennis champion, Norris Williams. Then a lifeboat came to our rescue, even though it was already filled to the gills. Afar, I spotted a ship's lights and knew the Carpathia was coming and that we were saved.
Harold Bride remained at his post to keep on sending messages. He only left the Carpathia the following morning, both legs frostbitten and crushed. Bruce Ismay remains holed up in the ship's doctor's cabin. The White Star Line's vice president, Philip Franklin, comes to see him. He barely has enough time to warn him that things seem to be setting off on a bad path. When the door opens, revealing a man in a long gray overcoat and a derby hat, Senator Smith. The senator states that he's come to serve papers on Bruce Ismay, who is to remain in the United States and appear as a witness before the Senate inquiry. The crowd waits, illuminated by powerful spotlights, so the survivors can make out their families. There, the first passengers are coming off, but disappointment is immediately heard. They're the Carpathia's passengers. Soon, none are left. Then a young woman appears, hatless, with mussed-up hair. She hesitates, scans the crowd, before stepping down to be greeted by a rush of newspapermen. She is the first survivor. People scream out in joy or sorrow. They fight to get a glimpse. Pandemonium breaks out. With that, the Salvation Army's band starts to play. The stewards disembark a jam-packed canvas bag. The reporters rush towards it. They say it's the only luggage left from the Titanic. It bears the letter G. The owner appears, Mr. Samuel Goldenberg. He explains that he bought it on board the Carpathia to carry his and his wife's clothes. "How did you manage to reach the Carpathia?" queries a journalist.
A little before 1 a.m., my wife Edvija and myself managed to leave in lifeboat number 5 on starboard up front near the first-class entrance. First, the women and children got in. There was Miss Marguerite Frolicker, a first-class passenger like us. Mr. Ismay helped them on board. Then, seeing as no women were left, Mr. Pittman, the officer, allowed the men to climb in. Myself, of course, and the tennis player, you know, the famous Bear, Carl Bear, as well as Mr. and Mrs. Beckwith and their daughter, Helen Newsom. They started lowering the lifeboat towards the sea, very slowly. Mr. Ismay was jumping around like a lunatic, waving his arms, yelling, "Faster, faster!" Another officer, Mr. Lowe, told him to get lost. "If you'd be kind enough to get out of here, I might be able to do something. You want me to hurry up? You'll end up making me drown the whole bunch." My wife thought the officer would be dismissed. I mean, rebuking the big boss. But Ismay seemed broken and just left. That's when Dr. Frauenthal, a first-class passenger, leapt into the lifeboat to be with his wife. His brother followed suit. They fell on poor Mrs. Stengel, shattering 2 of her ribs and knocking her cold. We were 41 on board. We rowed away from the ship. On the Titanic, as it got later, more and more people crowded around the lifeboats. In the end, the crew had to link arms to stop the people from climbing in. Flares exploded in the sky, illuminating men leaping into the lifeboats already at sea. Only the stern was still out of the water. People were massed up there. A priest, Father Biles, was giving absolution to 100 faithful, and the band played "Nearer My God to Thee." Suddenly, around 2:30 a.m., the smokestacks fell and the lights went out, came back on again, and we saw that the stern had risen out of the water nearly at a right angle to the sea. It remained like that, frozen, for a few seconds. Then everything went out, and it sank in one go. The ocean resounded with one long, horrid scream. Officer Pittman turned back to save people, but some women begged him not to for fear the lifeboat would overturn. A half an hour later, at 3 a.m., when the sea had become silent once again, we tied up to lifeboat number 7 and waited until dawn. We found the Carpathia on its way to save us just after 5 a.m. The first survivors had been on deck for an hour or so. We wrapped ourselves in blankets and were served tea, coffee, soup. All that without a word, without a sound. Our grief was contained. Ismay was in a state of shock. He locked himself up in the cabin of the Carpathia's doctor. The last survivor to climb on board was the Titanic's second officer, Lightoller. All in all, we were 705. 1,523 people had been lost. Seeing as the first and second classes were less than half full, and the third class just over 2/3, well, there had been room for over 1,000 more victims. Just think of it. The Carpathia went back to look for more survivors. In vain. Just a single body. So Captain Rostron brought the flag to half-mast, and mass was held over the wreck site. We all broke down. There were tears in both the men and women's eyes. A service was held for the people who didn't survive on board and who were buried at sea, like that poor young sailor, Lyons. May he rest in peace. Then we collapsed where we could, while the Carpathia steamed towards New York. I organized a fundraiser for the Carpathia's sailors. Dr. Frauenthal was the treasurer. Molly Brown donated a lot. But my wife is exhausted, and so am I. Please excuse me, gentlemen.
Bruce Ismay remains holed up in the ship's doctor's cabin. The White Star Line's vice president, Philip Franklin, comes to see him. He barely has enough time to warn him that things seem to be setting off on a bad path when the door opens, revealing a man in a long gray overcoat and a derby hat, Senator Smith. The senator states that he's come to serve papers on Bruce Ismay, who is to remain in the United States and appear as a witness before the Senate inquiry. After all the passengers have disembarked, to the joy of some and the despair of others, the 40,000-person crowd slowly disperses. Only the most desperate linger on, along with the last reporters. Then nobody is left. At midnight, while the rich are in their big hotels or their luxurious homes, and the poor in their dormitories, the only souls left on the Carpathia are her sailors and the surviving Titanic seamen. The rescued sailors are taken off through the stern and ferried to customs in a small ship before spending the night in the third-class bunks of the Lapland. April 18th, 1912 draws to a close. On the White Star Line pier, the lifeboats are looted by souvenir hunters. The Carpathia's captain, Arthur Henry Rostron, is the hero of the day, maybe even the true hero of the whole story, explaining that it is by a stroke of luck that his men heard the SOS because the operator was about to close down for the night. He tells how he did not hesitate 1 second before rushing to the Titanic's rescue, preparing everything down to the slightest detail.
I designated the beds in which to lay down the survivors and who should take care of them. I doubled the lookouts and had the first aid kits brought onto the deck. I had bags prepared to hoist the children on board, and I even had sturdy chairs set up with ropes in order to tie down the survivors the wreck might have made insane.
But if Rostron moves everyone, even Senator Smith, to tears as he talks of how the survivors appeared and of the mass he celebrated, he also is adamant that the lifeboats could have easily carried 70 people, far from Ismay's 45. Charles Herbert Lightoller, the highest-ranking officer to have survived, starts out by charming everyone with his melodious voice and his intelligent and professional speech. But little by little, Smith realizes Lightoller actually avoids the questions, craftily eluding the true answers. So, the senator starts to take the officer apart, questioning him for 3 hours, pinpointing several discrepancies, among which an important one. The Titanic's officers had not heard of the tests conducted on lifeboats and thought that while they could hold 65 people at sea, they could not be hoisted down the side with that many people for fear of breaking in two or snapping the ropes. This judgmental error and communication problem killed 400 people. Nor can Lightoller explain why 216 crew members escaped in place of the passengers, when they should have only been 2 per lifeboat.
All I can say is that on my side of the ship, there were only 2 or 3 per boat.
Neither can he remember seeing people floating in the water or trying to climb onto the lifeboats. Furthermore, Lightoller tries to explain that they did not know there were icebergs in the area. But he must withdraw his testimony when Senator Smith shows him the copies of telegrams sent by various ships to the Titanic. Anyhow, Lightoller obstinately refuses to tell what the officers knew about the icebergs or what precautions were taken. What to make of his forgetfulness, the desire to cover for his captain, the wish to help the White Star Line and his own career, the mistrust of the hostile atmosphere felt in America. Who knows? Senator William Alden Smith, a Republican from Michigan, is a fierce opponent of the trusts in general and of J.P. Morgan in particular. Morgan, the owner of the White Star Line, among other holdings. Therefore, Smith's inquiry will have a personal side to it, but the senator knows how to remain objective, and his goal is not so much to try the White Star Line as it is to prove that someone has to be responsible. Even though the ship went down in international waters, and although she was flying the Union Jack, the senator bases himself on a law of 1898 that says one can sue the owners if they were guilty of misconduct. This is also the crusade of a certain America, which at that time is socially more advanced than a certain England, still caught up in its highly Victorian conventions and inequalities. Smith cannot let this crime go unpunished. Above all, he wants to ensure that the dead did not die entirely in vain, and he wants to use this inquiry to make new laws, rendering another such accident impossible. In the meantime, in England, the entire country mourns the passengers lost, the sailors ravished by the sea, and Captain Smith, who died doing his duty. Friday, St. Paul's Cathedral, London. Thousands of people fill the nave, pouring out into the nearby streets where thousands of others stand. A memorial mass is celebrated for the lost souls. In the crowd are family members of the survivors who are not even sure if their relatives are alive or dead, so many contradictory messages have they received. There also are the friends of the missing, desperately clinging to empty hopes until the other sailors return. The ceremony ends with a hymn, "O God, our help in ages past," and the chorus reverberates under the vault, "O hear us when we implore you for those threatened by the sea." Nobody yet knew that the very same words had ended the divine service on board the Titanic, Sunday night, just before the tragedy. In New York, when evening comes, Senator Smith makes a crucial decision: to retain the English witnesses in the United States, since if they leave, the Americans will never manage to make them return. The lawyers counterattack, explaining that the White Star Line will not pay for 200 sailors to remain in New York for long. So Smith pulls out the list Sheriff Joe Bayless gave him and subpoenas some 30 of the Titanic's crew members. The others can leave. Bayless spends the night finding the men and bringing them in to appear the next morning so the inquiry may continue. Saturday, the crowd gathers once again at the Waldorf Astoria as the inquiry continues in a bigger hall, the Myrtle Room. It's ironic that this room, one of the favorite high society function halls, be chosen to hold what is, in a way, the trial of a period built on social gaps. It is Harold Bride's day. The 22-year-old Englishman, who graduated from telegraph school barely 10 months ago, is called to testify and appears as the living illustration of all the tragedy's horror. Seated in a wheelchair, exhausted, with his creased face resting on a pillow, his jaw dangling and his left foot still in bandages. The room is so crowded he has to be carried in over the spectators. The audience is silent, overcome with admiration and compassion. Everybody hangs on Senator Smith's words when he questions Bride about the existence of telegrams warning of icebergs. And Bride answers that it is true.
Yes, telegrams warning of ice fields were handed to Captain Smith Sunday afternoon.
The crowd stares at Ismay and Lightoller. So they knew. Bride keeps on answering the questions, even though he's getting more and more tired. In the end, the senator asks whether he escaped the Titanic on the overturned lifeboat with Lightoller.
Yes.
Bride answers.
I'm the last person they invited on board.
What do you mean, the last person invited?
Asks Smith.
Do you mean that there were several of you?
Of course, there were people all over. There were scores of us trying to climb onto the raft.
Again, the room stares at Lightoller. Senator Smith starts to shed tears, and women moan. They start to comprehend the extent of the disaster. But if Lightoller lied about the icebergs, about there not being anybody in the sea near his lifeboat, what about his statement that he did not give priority to the crew members? Bride answers,
Oh, we were nearly only employees on board. Out of 30, there must have been only 3 or 4 passengers.
Smith thanks Bride for his courage and candor and suspends the session, stating that it will resume in Washington, D.C. Then, Senator Smith asks Sheriff Bayless about the Lapland. Is it already sailing back to England? Yes, answers the sheriff, but it can't be very far.
Joe, have the Lapland stopped. I want you to bring me more of the Titanic sailors to testify. There's something in the wind, and I want to find out what it is. I've barely begun to work the lid off this case. Everything is still to be done.
Smith orders Ismay, Franklin, Lightoller, and the 3 other surviving officers to come to Washington, as well as 30-odd sailors. Joe Bayless succeeds in getting on board the Lapland, and comes back with 5 more witnesses. Otherwise, on the Lapland, finally out at sea, the other surviving British sailors are headed to England.
Fleet, he told me everything. Like he was only 20 minutes away from hitting the sack when...
It is 20 to midnight, when the young Frederick Fleet, up in the crow's nest, peering out into the starry night, suddenly spots a dark shape right in the Titanic's path. "Ice, dead ahead," he yells, tolling the bell. He grabs the telephone and rings the bridge. "What's happening?" queries Officer Moody. The answer comes over the telephone. "Iceberg, dead ahead." "Thank you," answers Moody, who hangs up. The reaction is immediate. The engines are reversed, and the ship swerves to avoid the obstacle. Titanic seems to take an hour to turn a little. In fact, it takes a mere 10 seconds. Fleet sees the iceberg touch the ship, pour a ton of ice onto the forward deck, then slide along the ship's flank with a tearing sound before disappearing into the night. All this in just a few seconds. Well, oh my, that was a close call, sighs Fleet, relieved.
Yeah, well, me, I say it ain't normal they didn't have no binoculars up there.
That's right. Lightoller, he says that if he gives you some, you just keep your eyes glued to him and you don't look all around.
Is that so? Has he been up there in the crow's nest even once? Because on a clear, starry night, you can see twice as far with the binoculars.
You know what? I don't even realise today that we ran that floating ice cube. I didn't feel a thing.
Well, you're lucky, because me, I was up front on B-deck, and I saw the thing coming straight at us, and I heard this deadly racket. The passengers came out, but I calmed them down. One of them even wanted me to put some of the iceberg in his whiskey.
What a waste!
Hey, well, us down on D-deck underneath, talk about a waste. It was a hell of a waste. We took a big blow and even went flying out of our beds. We pulled our clothes on, but we weren't even able to make it down to our post, seeing as there was all this water bubbling up the ladder, and it was rising mighty fast.
Yeah. Well, the one that suffered most was...
The Titanic.
For sure. But no, I was talking of Barrett.
Frederick Barrett is at work, feeding the starving boilers in room number 6, when the alarm goes off and the red light comes on. Just then, a blow is felt, and green seawater surges into the hold through a tear running along the entire length of the room, 1.5 feet above the floor. Barrett and the others barely have enough time to leap towards the watertight door that slams behind them. The lights go out. In the light of the electric lamps, Barrett and some 15 men try to empty the boilers in room number 5, when a wave washes through the room. Barrett and his men escape up the stairs as the water gushes up after them.
I'm telling you that those fat cats there in their hobnobbing dinner Instead of pigging it, they should have been picking their brains.
How about you? Do you think you have a brain?
Look who's speaking. Anyhow, if they'd made their so-called watertight compartments a bit higher, well, the tub wouldn't have sunk.
And if they'd have put a few more lifeboats on board, we could have saved everyone.
Where'd you get that idea? The officers are a bunch of morons. The way things went, they weren't even able to get all the lifeboats overboard. So even if we'd had 3 times as many, it would have been useless.
Other than having us paint and clean the damn things, as though we don't have better stuff to do.
Go on, lads. All this is a lot of horsecrook.
Hey!
It is, because let me tell you, its hull number at Harland and Wolff's, the Titanic's, it was 390904.
So what? What do I care?
You can stuff your care. Look at 390904 in the mirror. It makes N-O-P-O-P-E, meaning no Pope. You see, the anti-Pope. So it was done for from the start. God struck down the blasphemers.
Why look at it in a mirror?
'Cause it's the Antichrist, dimwit.
It's true that it was done for from the start, but not because of that. My sister...
You've got a sister? Why didn't you say so before? Where's she at?
Leave my sister be. You wouldn't even know what to do with her. Anyhow, I was saying that my sister, she looked into the Titanic's astrological chart for the day it was pushed into the sea. Well, she came up with danger on or near water, accidents during travel, sadness, and loss of family.
But then, how come you left on the ship? You nuts or what?
No, it's just that my sister, she's always been wrong in her predictions.
Yeah, well, in the meantime, what's eating me up is that they cut off our salary at 2:30 a.m. just after she went down. We nearly drowned before having to row on the icy sea, and we don't even get a penny.
So long as you do not contribute to the White Star Line, the company owes you nothing at all, is what they told me.
He makes me laugh, that Senator Smith with his inquiry. Are you Mr. Ismay? Please have some more tea. What's for sure is that he ain't talking to the only ones who suffered, the poor and the workers. 36 engineers had the engines running until 3 minutes before the Titanic went under, and not one survived. 84 stokers had to go back down after they'd escaped the rising water. So the engines don't stop. In the end, only 8 made it out.
And the postman? All 5 drowned to try and save the rich people's mail.
You're forgetting the third-class passengers. The 3/4 of them died, locked up in the lower decks.
No, not locked up. I was there. The women wouldn't follow me out onto the bridge. They were panicking. They wouldn't leave their husbands. A lot didn't understand English, and it's a real maze down there.
Okay, but still, some doors stayed locked.
True. My mistake. It's because of the American law that requires that third-class people be contained to avoid spreading contagious diseases.
What kills me is the rigmarole with the Californian, because they have to have their scapegoat. They can't understand that it was just a stroke of bad luck, a whole bunch of little problems, slip-ups that turned into a major tragedy. So, seeing as they can't say it went down because of this or that, they're gonna pin it all on the Californian and Captain Lord. They're gonna say that if only he'd have done something, nobody would have drowned.
Well, it's kind of true.
True? Come off it. He couldn't have. Listen up. Officer Boxall says he saw a small ship 5 miles away that moved and left. The guys on the Californian, they say they saw a small ship 5 miles away that moved and left. The Californian called out with its Morse lamp, no answer. While on the Titanic, well, they were signalling like mad. Don't you think they'd have seen one another, huh? And don't it strike you as strange that neither of them rust buckets moved? And then, in the morning, the Californian finds out the Titanic went down 10 miles away. 5 and 5 makes 10. It's as clear as a miser's coffee. There was another ship between the Titanic and the Californian. And when the Californian saw the flares behind the mystery ship, it signalled and got no answer, seeing as it wasn't the Titanic.
Huh? Impossible. They wouldn't have pulled out of there and let the Titanic go down. No sailor in the world would have done that.
Oh, yeah? Not even a captain who doesn't feel like pulling into the harbour with survivors sprawled out all over his bales of opium or bootleg tobacco? Not even a captain with a boat full of sailors running from the law and who aren't too keen on winding up on the front page of the paper? Don't worry, my boy. Nobody's going to come up and confess to prove I'm right. And old man Lord, they'll say he's a coward if he says what I just told you.
Senator Smith pursued the Senate inquiry in Washington, D.C., taking the witnesses along with him. and calling upon many experts. He was unable to prove criminal guilt, yet his conclusion was harsh.
Built at great expense by an illustrious company whose reputation alone replaced the engine and lifeboat tests, the Titanic went to sea without any preparation whatsoever. This indifference in the face of danger, this self-confidence bordering on vanity, also turned out to be Captain Smith's mistake. He paid no attention to the falling temperature nor to the iceberg warnings, simply letting the liner speed into the ice fields. And after the collision, under the pretense of calming the passengers down, they were hoodwinked. Imagine the distress of the third-class passengers, the first to see the water well up in their cabins, the first to perceive the liner's sharp list, and the last to benefit from the lifeboats, filled in such confusion and such a total lack of planning that they left half empty. Let us only pray that this tragedy gives birth to a new era of vigilance, and that the generations to come will be protected by new laws.
These laws were passed. While the over 300 bodies retrieved by the Mackay Bennett are brought back to be identified and buried in Halifax, while memorials are erected throughout the world to honor the dead, be they famous people or just simple loved ones, minds are changing, and new regulations are set up, still valid today. Fines for companies that do not comply with safety rules. Strict laws concerning life jackets, lifeboats, water pumps. Radios that must be on 24 hours a day. 8-hour workdays for the sailors. And ice patrol to keep watch over the iceberg route. The ice patrol would give birth to the American Coast Guard, which every April 15th deposits a reef at 41 degrees 46 minutes north by 50 degrees 14 minutes west, the historic coordinates of the spot where lies the wreck of the most sadly notorious liner in the world.